We know the place. We know it even if we don't believe in it. It is a kingdom of fire and shadow, a landscape of despair painted behind our collective eyelids by centuries of scripture, poetry, and art. We can almost hear the screams of the damned, smell the sulfur on the air, and feel the searing, unquenchable heat. It is a place of eternal conscious torment, presided over by demons who delight in suffering, a cosmic prison built by a righteous God to house the wicked for all time. This is hell. It is perhaps the most terrifying and powerful concept ever conceived by the human mind, a story told to enforce morality, to threaten sinners, and to promise ultimate, terrifying justice. But what if I told you that this vision of hell, in all its fiery, gruesome detail, is not a timeless, divinely revealed truth? What if it is, instead, a human invention, a concept that was not born fully formed, but was built, piece by piece, over thousands of years, evolving and changing dramatically with the cultures that shaped it? What if the idea of hell is not a map of the afterlife, but a mirror, reflecting our own deepest fears, our thirst for justice, and our ever-shifting understanding of God and ourselves? In this video, we will journey through history to uncover the truth. We will trace the evolution of eternal punishment from its earliest, shadowiest roots in the ancient world, through the fiery imagination of the Middle Ages, and into the modern era where it continues to haunt and fascinate us. This is the story of how humans invented hell. Our investigation begins not in fire, but in dust and silence. In the world of the ancient Hebrews, the authors of the Old Testament, the afterlife was not a place of divine judgment, but a dim, morally neutral reality known as Sheol. The word itself likely means the pit or the grave, and it was understood as the final destination for everyone, the righteous and the wicked, kings and commoners alike. The book of Ecclesiastes describes it with stark finality. Whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might, for in the realm of the dead, where you are going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. This was not a place of torment, but a land of profound forgetfulness, a kingdom of shadows where the dead existed as weak, silent shades cut off from life and from God. There was no moral sorting at the gates of Sheol. The prophet Job, in his suffering, longs for the release of the grave, describing it as a place where the wicked cease from turmoil and the weary are at rest. This is a crucial point. In early Judaism, divine justice was believed to take place on earth during one's lifetime. God rewarded the righteous with long life, prosperity, and many children. He punished the wicked with sickness, failure, and an early death. The afterlife was merely an epilogue of silent decay, not a theatre of reward or punishment. This concept was mirrored in the beliefs of their neighbours. The ancient Mesopotamians had the land of no return, a dark, dusty city from which no one escaped. The idea of a vibrant, judicial afterlife simply hadn't been invented yet. At the same time, another powerful civilization was forming its own ideas about life after death: the ancient Greeks. Their conception of the underworld, known as Hades, bears a striking resemblance to Sheol. It was, for most, a gloomy and uneventful place, a realm ruled by the god of the same name, where the shades of the dead lingered without purpose. However, the Greeks introduced a critical innovation that would plant the seeds for the future of hell. Within Hades, there was a special, deeper abyss known as Tartarus. But Tartarus was not for the average sinner. It was a divine prison reserved for mythological figures of legendary status who had committed extraordinary crimes against the gods themselves. Here you would find Tantalus, forever tortured by a hunger and thirst he could never quench for daring to test the gods. Here was Sisyphus, eternally forced to roll a boulder up a hill, only to have it roll back down, as punishment for his hubris and deceit. These weren't ordinary mortals being punished for lying or stealing. These were titans, demigods, and mythical kings facing divine retribution for cosmic defiance. For the average Greek, the afterlife was still the bleak, boring plains of Hades. But in the stories of Tartarus, we see the first fusion of the underworld with the idea of active, eternal, and specific punishment. It was a concept waiting to be democratized. The world into which Jesus was born was a melting pot of Jewish and Greco-Roman ideas. While the traditional concept of Sheol still held sway, the idea of a more distinct fate for the righteous and the wicked after death was beginning to emerge, partly through Greek influence. It is in the pages of the New Testament that these emerging ideas begin to crystallize into something far more terrifying. Jesus himself, in the Gospels, uses powerful and fiery imagery to warn of judgment. But to understand his words, we must understand the language he was using. One of the most crucial terms he employed was Gehenna. Unlike Sheol, Gehenna was a real physical place that his audience knew well. It was the Valley of Hinnom, a ravine just outside the walls of Jerusalem. Historically, it had been a site of pagan child sacrifice, and in Jesus' time, it functioned as the city's garbage dump. Fires were kept smoldering there constantly to consume the city's refuse, and it was a place associated with filth, fire, and defilement. So when Jesus warns of being cast into Gehenna, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched, he is using a powerful, local metaphor. He is taking the most repulsive place his audience could imagine and using it as a symbol for the spiritual consequences of a life lived against God's will. He was not necessarily describing a literal subterranean torture chamber, but a state of complete, ruinous, and foul destruction. This metaphorical language is supercharged in the final book of the New Testament, the book of Revelation. This is an apocalyptic vision filled with surreal symbolism, cosmic battles, and prophetic imagery. It is here we find the first mention of the lake of fire. But again, context is key. The lake of fire is described as the final destination for Satan, his demons, and figures of cosmic evil like the beast and the false prophet. It is only after these ultimate enemies of God are dealt with that humans whose names are not found in the book of life are also cast into it. Theologians have long debated whether this, too, is a powerful symbol for utter destruction. What the text calls the second death, or a literal place of eternal fiery torment. What is clear is that the New Testament introduced a stark divergence of fates after death, a clear separation between the saved and the damned, and associated damnation with fiery, agonizing imagery that would ignite the imagination of future generations. The parables of Jesus further cemented this idea. The story of the rich man and Lazarus depicts a wealthy, selfish man in fiery torment in Hades, looking across a chasm at Lazarus, the poor beggar who is now comforted in the bosom of Abraham. The parable of the sheep and the goats describes the Son of Man at the final judgment, separating all of humanity into two groups. To the wicked goats on his left, he says, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels." Whether intended as literal descriptions or powerful moral allegories, these stories provided the raw material for a fully formed doctrine of hell. They established a clear link between one's actions on earth and eternal punishment in the afterlife. The shadowy, neutral underworld of Sheol was dead. The age of hell was about to begin. With the raw materials provided by Scripture, the architects of early Christian theology, known as the Church Fathers, began to construct the intellectual framework for hell. Influential thinkers like Tertullian and Augustine of Hippo took the fiery metaphors of the New Testament and systematized them into a coherent, terrifying doctrine. Augustine argued forcefully that the punishment of hell was both eternal and conscious. He debated and dismissed the idea that the fire was merely symbolic, insisting on a literal physical torment that afflicted resurrected bodies. For Augustine, the horror of hell served a vital theological purpose. It magnified the glory of God's justice and the incredible gift of His grace for those who were saved. Hell became a central tool for enforcing church doctrine and encouraging moral behavior through fear. But doctrine alone cannot account for the vivid, gruesome hell that took hold of the medieval imagination. This vision was fed by a torrent of non-canonical texts and popular folklore. Apocryphal books like the Apocalypse of Peter, written in the 2nd century, offered detailed guided tours of the underworld, presenting a horrifying catalogue of specific tortures for specific sins. In this vision, blasphemers were hung by their tongues, adulterous women were hung by their hair over boiling mire, and murderers were cast into pits of venomous snakes. These texts were wildly popular, functioning as the horror blockbusters of their day. They filled in the gruesome details that the Bible left out, and these details became fused with popular belief, spreading through sermons and fireside stories until they were treated as gospel truth. This process of imaginative world-building reached its absolute zenith in the 14th century with Dante Alighieri's epic poem, the Inferno. Dante's work is not scripture, but no other text has had a more profound impact on the Western conception of hell. He took centuries of theological speculation and folk belief and organized it with the precision of an architect and the soul of a poet. His hell was a meticulously structured funnel, descending through 9 distinct circles, each designed to punish a specific category of sin with a chillingly appropriate poetic justice. The lustful are forever blown about by a violent storm, denied the peace they could never find in life. The gluttonous are forced to lie in a vile, putrid slush under a ceaseless, filthy rain. The wrathful fight each other endlessly in the muddy river Styx. Dante's vision was so powerful, so detailed, and so psychologically astute that it effectively overwrote the vaguer descriptions in the Bible. When people thought of hell, they no longer thought of a shadowy pit or a symbolic valley of fire. They thought of Dante's circles. His work was illustrated by artists like Botticelli and Gustave Doré, cementing these images into our cultural consciousness. He gave hell its geography, its rules, and its monsters. He took a theological concept and turned it into a terrifying, unforgettable place. The human imagination had not just embellished hell, it had perfected it. The dawn of the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century brought a new wave of theological scrutiny to all church doctrines, including hell. The Reformers, with their rallying cry of sola scriptura, by scripture alone, sought to strip away what they saw as centuries of man-made tradition and return to the Bible as the sole authority. Figures like Martin Luther and John Calvin certainly did not abandon the concept of hell. In fact, they preached it with fiery conviction. For them, hell was a stark and necessary reality, proof of God's perfect justice and the depravity of human sin. However, they rejected the elaborate mythology that had grown up around it during the Middle Ages. They dismissed Dante's circles and the specific tortures of the Apocrypha as human inventions, focusing instead on the biblical descriptions of fire, darkness, and separation from God. The Reformation's emphasis on individual interpretation of Scripture, however, inadvertently opened the door for new and diverse views on the nature of damnation. While the mainstream reformers held to eternal conscious torment, other smaller groups began to question the doctrine. The idea of annihilationism, the belief that the wicked are not tormented forever, but are simply destroyed or cease to exist, began to gain traction among some thinkers. They argued that an eternal punishment could simply mean a punishment with eternal consequences, namely, the permanent loss of life. These were minority views, often suppressed, but they show that even within the new scripture-focused paradigm, the exact nature of hell was far from settled. The monolith of medieval belief had been cracked, and through those cracks, new ideas would begin to grow. The seismic intellectual shifts of the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries delivered a powerful blow to the traditional, literal conception of hell. A new emphasis on reason, humanism, and scientific inquiry led many philosophers to question the morality of eternal punishment. The idea of a loving God inflicting infinite pain for finite sins began to seem not just unjust, but monstrous and barbaric, a relic of a less civilized age. As our understanding of the cosmos expanded, the idea of a physical place of fire beneath the earth became geologically and astronomically untenable. Hell, for many educated people, was slowly moving from a physical location to a philosophical problem. In the modern era, this trend has continued, forcing theology to adapt. Today, many mainstream Christian denominations have softened or completely reinterpreted the doctrine of hell. While some fundamentalist groups still preach a literal fiery torment, many theologians have embraced alternative views. Annihilationism has become a more widely accepted position. Another popular view is universal reconciliation, or universalism, which posits that, eventually, all souls will be saved and reconciled with God, arguing that a truly all-loving God would never give up on any of his children. Perhaps the most common modern interpretation, however, is that hell is not a physical place at all, but a metaphorical or psychological state. In this view, hell is the profound, self-imposed separation from God. It is the natural and eternal consequence of rejecting love, goodness, and connection. It is the torment of living forever with the knowledge of one's own selfishness and the pain one has caused. This reinterpretation solves the moral problem of a torturing God by placing the responsibility for hell squarely on the individual. Hell is not a place God sends you. It is the state of choosing to be without God forever. This shift marks the final stage in our story. The transformation of hell from a physical place to a psychological state, from a divine torture chamber to a human-made condition. Our journey is complete. We have traveled from the silent, dusty underworld of Sheol, a place of equals in death, to the Greek prison of Tartarus, where only cosmic rebels were punished. We saw the fiery metaphors of Gehenna and the lake of fire in the New Testament plant the seeds of a punitive afterlife. We witnessed the medieval mind, armed with theology and a terrifying imagination, build Dante's intricate circles of torment, giving hell a geography and a rulebook. And finally, we have seen the modern mind, troubled by the morality of eternal pain, dismantle the physical location and rebuild it as a state of psychological separation. The history of hell is not the history of a static, divinely revealed place. It is the history of an idea, a powerful, terrifying, and profoundly human idea. It has changed and evolved, reflecting the deepest anxieties, the highest ideals, and the political needs of the cultures that have embraced it. Hell has been a tool for social control, a promise of ultimate justice, a warning against sin, and a mirror for our own capacity for cruelty. The invention of hell reveals very little about what happens after we die, but it tells us a great deal about ourselves. It shows our desperate need to believe that life is fair, that actions have consequences, and that, in the end, justice, even a terrifying, eternal justice, will prevail. It is a testament not to divine revelation, but to the awesome and terrible power of human imagination.